Lloyd Wright, an Autobiography. Book 1, Family. Prelude. A light blanket of snow, fresh fallen over sloping fields, gleaming in the morning sun. Clusters of pod-topped weeds woven of bronze here and there, sprinkling the spotless expanse of white. Dark sprays of slender metallic straight lines tipped with quivering dots, patterned to the eye of the sun, as the sun spread delicate network of more pattern and blue shadows on the white beneath. "Come, my boy," said Uncle John to his sister Anna's 9-year-old. "Come now, and I will show you how to go." Taking the boy by the hand, he pulled his big hat down over his shock of gray and started straight across and up the sloping fields toward a point upon which he had fixed his keen blue eyes. Neither to the right nor the left, intent upon his goal, straight forward he walked, possessed. But soon the boy caught the play of naked weed against the snow, sharp shadows laced in blue arabesque beneath. Leaving his mitten in the strong grasp, he got free. He ran first left to gather beads on stems, and then beads and tassels on more stems, then right to gather prettier ones, again left to some darker and more brilliant, and beyond to a low spreading kind. Farther on again to tall golden lines tipped with delicate clusters of dark bronze heads. Eager, trembling, he ran to and fro behind Uncle John, his arms growing full of weeds. A long way up the slope, arrived at the point upon which he had fixed. Uncle John turned to look back. A smile of satisfaction lit the strong Welsh face. His tracks in the snow were straight as any string could be straight. The boy came up, arms full, face flushed, glowing. He looked up at his uncle to see what he had found. A stern look came down on him. The lesson was to come. Back there was the long, straight, mindful, heedless line Uncle John's own feet had purposefully made. He pointed to it with pride. And there was the wavering, searching, heedful line embroidering the straight one like some free, engaging vine as it ran back and forth across it. He pointed to that, too, with gentle reproof. Both stood looking back. The small hand with half-frozen fingers was again in its mitten in the older, stronger hand, an indulgent, benevolent smile down on the shamed young face. And somehow there was something, not clear. Uncle John's meaning was plain. Neither to the right nor to the left, but straight is the way. The boy looked at his treasure and then at Uncle John's pride, comprehending more than Uncle John meant he should. The boy was troubled. Uncle John had left something out that made all the difference. The boy. Back in Wales in the Victorian era, there lived a hatter, stalwart maker of strange black high-pointed cones. The witches wore them when riding on their broomsticks. The Welsh wore them for hats. The hatter was proud of his work, and peddled his hats at fairs. He would throw one down on the ground, and, "Stand on it," he would say to anyone likely to buy. On Sundays he preached, a firebrand of a man, questioning how man should be just with God, reflecting the answers most men, and women too, gave him. He was tall, this Richard Jones, dark-eyed, an impassioned, unpopular Unitarian. The daughter of an old Welsh family, Mark Lloyd, heard him and fell in love with him. "For there is the just man who perisheth in his righteousness, and there is the wicked man who prolongeth in his wickedness. But he that knoweth God and serveth him shall come forth of them all. So she believed, and went away with him against her parents' will. If her wealthy family looked askance at her staunch man, what did that matter? She loved him and so trusted him. They had 7 children, whose family name became Lloyd Jones. Then, his outspoken liberality offending conservative popular opinion made America seem a hope and a haven to the Unitarian, and he came with a delicate wife and their 7 to the west. He came to find a farm where his stalwart strength might make a home, and a place to work in a land where speech was free, because men were. So the Hatter preacher, in his 53rd year, became the Wisconsin pioneer, with his Thomas, John, Margaret, Mary, Anna, Jenkin, and Nanny. Little Nanny, dying on the way, was left behind in strange ground. They came by canal boat and lake steamer to Milwaukee, on their way to Exonia, Wisconsin. 6 years the pioneer couple lived there, where they invoked 4 more children, Ellen, Jane, James, and Enos, to join their little band before they found the valley of the Wisconsin River. The valley, they all lovingly called it after life, and lovable it was, lying fertile between 2 ranges of diversified soft hills, with a 3rd ridge intruding and dividing it into 2 smaller valleys at the upper end. A small stream coursing down each joined at the homestead, and continued as a wider stream on its course toward the river. The lower or open end of the valley was crossed and closed by the broad and sandbarred Wisconsin, and from the hills you could look upon the great sandy and treeless plain that had once been the bed of the mighty Wisconsin of ancient times. When the virgin soil was broken by the grandfather and his sons, friendly Indians still lingered in the neighborhood. By the eldest son, Thomas, a carpenter, a small house was built on a gently sloping hillside facing south. Balm of Gilead trees and Lombardy poplars were planted by the mother and her brood around the little house and along the lanes. Lanes worm-fenced with oak rails split in the hillside forests which clung to the northern slopes and hill crowns. The southern slopes were all too dry for wood, and were bare except where rock ledges came through. The stables were roofed with straw, like the old Welsh thatch. The small, simple house, however, was modern, clapboarded and shingled by Thomas and his brothers. The kitchen was lean-to at the rear. An outside stairway led to a cool stone cellar beneath. A root house was close behind, partially dug into the ground and roofed with a sloping mound of grass-covered earth. Herein, the valley, the family tree of Richard Lloyd Jones, Welsh pioneer, with its 10 branches and 1 scar, struck root in the America of his hope. It was now his haven. Up to this time he had preached even while traveling on the ships or the canal boats or at the inns where the family stayed. Usually he was listened to with respect. There was fervor, exaltation in him. He read the Bible his own way, with strong Welsh accent, but no one could mistake his meaning. It was often new to his lettered betters, and would change their thought. He was pioneer not on the earth alone, but in mighty reaches of the spirit where the earth grows dim. He had a church during his years in Exonia, but again, where speech was free because men were, the church proposed to try him. He said, "You need not. If I am intrusive, I will get out. I cannot quell my spirit." He had for family crest the old Druid symbol. 3 bars, starting at one point and fanning outwards down. Truth against the world. Grandfather preached as Isaiah preached. The flower fadeth, the grass withereth, but the word of the Lord thy God endureth forever. His children had to learn that chapter of Isaiah the 40th by heart so they could recite it. The boy, his grandson, grew to distrust Isaiah. Was the flower any less desirable because it seemed to have been condemned to die that it might live more abundantly? As they all went to work in the fields, the grass seemed always necessary to life in the valley, most of all when it withered and was hay to keep the stalk alive in winter so the preacher himself might live. The flowers have closed their eyes beneath the stars, opened to the sun, dropped their seeds into the bosom of friendly earth, these thousands of years away from Isaiah, and bid fair to be unfaded, when the word of our Lord, as Isaiah heard it, has been much modified in the mouth. Might it not be then before all, that this very grass and these flowers too are in truth themselves the word of God? There seemed base ingratitude in the boastful thunder of that hateful text, when storms swept the valley from bank to bank of its ranges of hills, then black against a livid sky, lavishing the trees, drowning the helpless small things in the destruction that was wrought and the wreck that followed. The boy would see Isaiah's judgment. Ah, yes, and this prophet hell enlarged itself and opened her mouth without measure. Woe, woe, that word woe, struck on the young heart like a blow. Oh, woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine and mingle strong drink. Nor was there to be pity on the fruit of the womb. Little children were to be trodden under foot. Isaiah's awful Lord smote the poor multitudes with a mighty, continuous smite, never taking away the glory, dreadful hand outstretched to smite more, never satisfied with the smiting already done. And yet, according to Isaiah, were you willing to argue the matter, to reason with him? None seemed to know whether Isaiah or his Lord was meant by him. Your sins would be white as snow. Why? Verily, this holy warrior was a prophet, making God in his own image, turning his own lusts into virtues because they were on the side of pain instead of on the side of pleasure. What a curse to put upon the mind of any child! How much too much to thrash him! How much less than too little to lead him! His grandson would see the stalwart figure, legs straight in stirrups, of this spiritual brother of Isaiah, his dreaded, beloved Welsh grandfather, white-bearded and hoary-headed, sitting up straight upon his horse, Timothy, like a patriarch. Stick with shepherd's crook hung over the left forearm, the Bible of his faith firm against his side, and his grandson would see that he was thus able to whack his horse on the flank without losing his hold on the book. Weekdays, grandfather believed in the gospel of hard work. Relentlessly, he taught his children to add tired to tired and at it again, until the foundation of energy he himself was working out through his offspring began to cut away the forests and establish a human decency where the wilderness had been, a human smile where before had been the divine countenance. The Indians in passing sometimes brought venison and laid it on his doorstep, and he had tobacco for them, for he smoked a pipe and his pipe was a great source of shame to his family in after years. Their one shadow of reproach to him, though he was hard, and, should a child by some slip pour much more sorghum on his plate than intended, grandfather would righteously make him eat it all. His eyes should not be bigger than his stomach. Yet, his cruelty they respected. The pipe they could neither explain nor forgive. After all, it was the little grandmother who loved him and tempered his harshness. She had taught him to smoke as a cure for his asthma. The asthma he outgrew, but his pipe stayed with him while he lived. Grandmother's gentle spirit had welded together with their father's the strong wills of his 10 children in a united affection that was never broken. Some 10 years in the new home, and grandmother passed painlessly away, carried out into the open air of the arbor, which the grandfather had built with his own hands for her, as if he too were transported. Grandfather, the better part of his life gone now, got on his feet and led these children in a prayer, which they ever after remembered as the most beautiful they had ever heard. 11 years later, 87 years of age, he lay down on his bed to sleep. In the night, painlessly, he too slipped away. But not then was his spirit quelled. Grandfather's spirit lived on in a typical immigrant establishment on virgin American soil. A little Welsh clan by himself set in this little corner of that enormous new ground dedicated to freedom and parceled out among the breeds of the earth, stayed there with the ground. The ground! What does it not hold impartially in its depths, breadths, and beauty for the pioneer like Richard Lloyd Jones, in league with the stones of the field, himself like the ridges of primeval rock that ribbed the hills in contrast to the verdure rolling over them. He planted a small world within the world that is again within other worlds without end. He did not consider the lilies, how they grew. The little grandmother was all that to him. Beauty comes to all strong men in some guise, sometimes in disguise. His children, his flesh and blood, were like him, but with something of the element added to them, of the prayerful consideration for the lilies. That was the gentle grandmother's sympathy for the flower that fadeth, gratitude for the grass that withereth, came a step nearer to them and their mother. Mother's pine stands on the hillside lawn, a living child of hers. The little grandmother planted it there, a small thing. Careless mowing in the yard had injured it. They were going to pull it up and throw it away. No, leave it to me, she said, and bringing her sewing basket, knelt by the tree on the grass and covered the injury with pitch. She sewed a firm canvas band around the damaged trunk. The white pine is 75 feet tall today. Twice the lightning struck it, but it is still a noble specimen of its fast disappearing tribe. Occasional Lombardies, of which she was fond, stand isolated in clumps, where once their ranks along the lanes up the hillsides were unbroken. Her balm of Gilead has scattered around the valley to meet you in unexpected places, and the lilacs and bouncing Betty of her dooryard have colonized on their own along the roadsides in the great masses. Willing worker in this intensive human hive of work, song and prayer in rural Wisconsin was the sister Anna. Her son, the grandson who doubted Isaiah, It was he who went in quest of weeds while his Uncle John preached a sermon to the lad with his feet in the snow. Sister Anna herself, fourth child of Richard Lloyd Jones and Mary Lloyd, his wife, was 5 years old when the immigration from Wales took place. She walked with a free stride like a man, had much dark brown hair above a good brave brow, a fine nose, and dark dreaming brown eyes. Much fire and energy gave her temper beneath a self-possession, calm and gracious. Education was Sister Anna's passion even while very young. All this family was imbued with the idea of education as salvation. Education it was that made man out of the brute and saved him from the beast. Education it was, too, and that was her mistake, that unlocked the stores of beauty to let it come crowding in on every side at every gate. Although she believed education the direct manifestation of God to reach it, Sister Anna loved beauty. Soon she became a teacher in the countryside, riding a horse over the hills and through the woods to and from her school each day. Old men in the neighborhood still speak of Sister Anna as their teacher, with admiration and respect. The mother. Her school lay sometimes in one direction and sometimes in another, but always miles away. When her horse was needed in the fields, she walked, but usually she rode, coming from the still shadows of the wood to the far prospect from the hilltops, or overlooking the warm yellow-green sunshine on the meadow stretches. All blazed with bewildering color in autumn, and was more beautiful than ever when asleep under the wintry coverlets of snow, the shapes of the hills then like huge primeval monsters lying peacefully beneath them. Often she made those journeys, after dark, alone. Farmsteads were few and miles between, and often, too, it rained. She had to go just the same, covered with a blue soldier's cape that had brass buttons and a hood. Bareheaded otherwise, she went. She knew the ferns, the flowers, by name, the startled animals that ran along the road. There were berries by the roadside, too, wild cherries, plums, and grapes. She might reach out and take them on the branches, hanging the branches to the saddle bow, eating from them as she rode. How it happened that Sister Anna's ideals then are modern now, who can say? Unless first-hand contact with nature, in the primitive struggle, and the rugged faith of the Father, who said, "At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beasts of the earth, for thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field," gave it to her. This league with stones of the field must have imparted power to her imaginative vision. The boy of this story was her first child, Frank. Sister Anna came by him as the law prescribed. She married a man who satisfied her ideal of education, a man from Hartford, Connecticut, a circuit rider, a musician now going about the countryside near Lone Rock, Wisconsin, teaching folk to sing. She was 29 when she married him. "17 years her senior, the music master was a product of education, one of a family of intellectuals, to which James Russell Lowell belonged, and Alice and Phoebe Cary, from which distant branches he got his middle names. He was William Russell Cary Wright, tirelessly educating himself, first at Amherst, then to practice medicine, soon found by him to be no genuine science, then the law, but again disillusioned. He was about to hear the call his preacher ancestors, back to the days of Reformation in England, had all been hearing, and Sister Anna was the one to help him hear it. Soon after they were married, he too became a preacher. He had his music still, which always consoled him, and music was his friend to the last when all else had failed. After their son was born, something happened between the mother and father. Sister Anna's extraordinary devotion to the child disconcerted the father. He never made much of the child, it seems. No doubt his wife loved him no less, but now loved something more, something created out of her own fervor of love and desire, a means to realize her vision. The boy, she said, was to build beautiful buildings. Faith in prenatal influences was strong in this expectant mother. She kept her thoughts on the high things for which she yearned, and looked carefully after her health. There was never a doubt in the expectant mother's mind but that she was to have a boy. Fascinated by buildings, she took 10 full-page wood engravings of the old English cathedrals from Old England, a pictorial periodical to which the father had subscribed, had them framed simply in flat oak, and hung them upon the walls of the room that was to be her son's. Before he was born, she said she intended him to be an architect. In due course of nature, in a little inland town among the hills, Richard Center, Wisconsin, the father preaching and sometimes lawing, still teaching music, her son was born. That meant invocation ceased, and education took hold. When the boy was 3 with a baby sister a year old, the father was called to a church at Weymouth near Boston. About this time, the father's father died at home in his Hartford, Connecticut, aged 99. He went upstairs to his room, wrote by candlelight a letter to each of his 3 sons, addressed each in his own handwriting, went to bed, and, like the mother's father, painlessly slept to final sleep. Leaving the Lloyd Joneses prospering in their valley, our little family went east, nearer to Hartford, Connecticut, the father's native place, went on to activities still religious, but to different scenes, a different atmosphere, that of a Boston suburb. A modest gray wooden house near a tall white brick church in drab old historic Weymouth. The tall, handsome mother in that house with her boy and the little girl Jane, named after the mother's sister back there in the valley. A donation party of the previous evening had left 23 pumpkin pies on the pantry shelves, where there was nothing much else to eat after the party had gone away. No wonder if the mother longed for the valley for which she seemed always to pine.